The fist of Officer Tristan Kane connected with Malik Ellison's face hard enough to snap his head backward. The young man, already handcuffed, straightened slowly before being shoved roughly into the back seat. As the patrol car pulled away from the curb, Malik closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, knowing his father would soon wonder why he had not returned from basketball practice. And with absolute certainty, he knew that the officers who thought they were teaching a random black teenager a lesson had just made the most catastrophic mistake of their careers. They had assaulted the only son of the state attorney general. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. The rhythmic bounce of the basketball against the pavement matched the steady beat of Malik Ellison's heart as he headed home after afternoon practice. The late-day sun cast long shadows across the suburban streets, painting the world in shades of amber and gold. Tall and athletic, Malik moved with the grace of a player and the focus of a scholar. Sweat still clung to his dark skin despite the quick shower he had taken after Coach Langford finally called an end to the session. He adjusted his headphones, letting the smooth rhythms of Kendrick Lamar wrap around him while he replayed the practice in his mind. Coach had been especially impressed with his three-point shooting that day, suggesting he might start in the upcoming game against Westside High. The thought pulled a small smile across his face. Starting as a junior would look good on college applications. Another achievement to add to his strong grades and his volunteer work at the community center. Shifting the gym bag to his other shoulder to ease the pleasant ache of a solid workout, Malik checked the time on his phone. He had promised his father he would be home for dinner, which left him just enough time for the short walk. His father, always punctual, valued punctuality almost as much as he valued integrity, a quality that had served Elias Ellison well in his career as state attorney general. Malik had grown up watching his father build a reputation for fairness and accountability, lessons that had shaped his own approach to life. Turning onto Maple Street, crossing from the commercial area surrounding the high school into the residential neighborhood where spacious homes sat back from tree-lined streets, Malik noticed the gradual change in his surroundings. Larger yards, fewer pedestrians, more luxury vehicles in the driveways. But he had walked this route countless times over the years and barely registered the shift anymore. This was his community too, even if some people still gave him curious looks when he jogged through on weekends. The flash of red and blue lights reflecting in a nearby car window pulled Malik from his thoughts. He glanced over his shoulder and saw a patrol car moving slowly down the street, about half a block behind him. Something in his chest tightened instinctively, a response learned through years of careful conversations with his father. Elias had always been clear. Be respectful. Keep your hands visible. Make no sudden movements. And always, always stay calm. Malik lowered the volume on his headphones but did not remove them, keeping his pace steady while tracking the patrol car in his peripheral vision. The vehicle closed the distance slowly, matching his walking speed. He thought about calling his father but decided against it. There was no reason to worry him over something that was probably nothing. The patrol car pulled ahead a short distance and then angled toward the curb, blocking his path. Malik stopped, removed his headphones and let them rest around his neck, remembering his father's words. Hands where they can see them, son, always. Two officers stepped out of the vehicle, moving with the practiced coordination of longtime partners. The driver, a heavier man with reddish hair, approached with one hand resting casually on his gun. His badge read Voss. The other officer, the one who had been watching Malik, circled wider, positioning himself to Malik's left. His badge identified him as Kane. "Good afternoon," Officer Voss said in a neutral tone, though his eyes were sharp and evaluating. "Mind if we ask what you're doing in this neighborhood?" Malik felt the familiar weight settle in his stomach, the burden of having to justify his presence in places where some people believed he did not belong. He kept his expression neutral, his voice steady and respectful. "Just walking home from basketball practice, sir. I live a few blocks from here." Officer Kane stepped closer, his gaze sweeping over Malik's athletic frame, noting the gym bag, the headphones, the phone in his hand. "Got any identification?" he asked. Malik shook his head slightly. "No, sir. I just came from practice and didn't bring my wallet. My house is right on Oakwood Drive, about 3 blocks from here." The officers exchanged a look that made Malik's skin prickle with unease. He had seen that look before. Skepticism, suspicion, disbelief, though rarely directed at him so openly. It was not the first time he had been stopped, but something in the officer's attitude told him this encounter was different. "No ID, huh?" Officer Voss's voice hardened slightly. "That's convenient. And you expect us to believe you live in Oakwood Estates? Those are million-dollar houses, son." Malik felt his throat tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "Yes, sir. My father and I have lived there for years. Number 347, the blue colonial with white trim." Officer Kane stepped even closer, invading Malik's personal space in a way that felt deliberately intentional. "What's your name?" "Malik Ellison, sir." "And what does your father do that he can afford to live in Oakwood Estates?" The emphasis on his name carried a note of disbelief that made Malik's chest tighten further. "He works for the state government," Malik answered deliberately, keeping his response vague. Experience had taught him that sometimes revealing his father's position created more problems than it solved, especially in situations like this where tension was already rising. Officer Voss let out a short laugh. "State government, huh? Custodial maintenance?" His tone made clear what he thought of the answer. The sun had nearly set, the golden light replaced by the harsh artificial glow of street lights beginning to flicker on. A car passed slowly, easing off the gas as the driver noticed the police cruiser and the confrontation unfolding on the sidewalk. Malik felt exposed, aware that to outside eyes he might look like just another black teenager in trouble with the law, rather than a student trying to get home for dinner. As the silence stretched between them, Malik could feel the situation balanced on a knife's edge. He knew that what happened next would depend largely on decisions beyond his control, a reality for which his father had prepared him, but one from which he could never fully protect him. He stood completely still, hands visible at his sides, waiting for whatever came next, with the careful composure that had become second nature in a world where every movement was subject to scrutiny and misinterpretation. Officer Voss circled slowly behind Malik. His boots scraped against the concrete with deliberate weight while Officer Kane maintained his position uncomfortably close to Malik's face. The fading daylight cast harsh shadows across their features, transforming what should have been a routine interaction into something that felt increasingly predatory. Malik fought to control his breathing, keeping his hands clearly visible at his sides the way his father had always instructed. "You know what I think?" Officer Voss said, stopping just behind him. "I think we've got someone here casing these houses, maybe looking for an open window or an empty house to rob." Malik felt his heart hammer against his ribs, but he kept his voice steady. "No, sir. That's not happening. I really live in this neighborhood. If you want to walk me home, my father can verify everything." Officer Kane snorted, his hot breath against Malik's face. "Listen to that. Walk me home like we're some kind of chauffeur service." Suddenly he reached out, grabbed Malik's gym bag, and yanked it from his shoulder. "What have you got in here? Anything we should know about?" "Just my basketball uniform and some school books," Malik answered, fighting every instinct that told him to reach for his belongings. While Officer Kane unzipped the bag and rummaged roughly through its contents, the officer pulled out a calculus textbook and waved it mockingly. Well, a real scholar here, Voss," he said. He tossed the book carelessly back into the bag before continuing his search, dumping Malik's carefully folded uniform onto the sidewalk. "Please be careful with my things," Malik said, his voice lower now. The effort to maintain composure was evident despite his best efforts. "I haven't done anything wrong." Officer Voss moved back into Malik's line of sight, his expression hardening. "You want to talk about doing something wrong? How about trespassing? How about lying to officers? How about that attitude you're giving us right now?" "I'm not giving any attitude, sir," Malik answered, looking straight ahead rather than meeting the officer's eyes. Another lesson from his father's careful instructions on surviving encounters like this. "And I'm not trespassing. I live here." Officer Kane finished searching the gym bag without finding anything of interest and turned his attention to Malik's pockets. "Empty them," he ordered, pointing impatiently. Malik slowly reached into the pockets of his athletic pants, producing only his phone, his house key, and some loose change. Officer Kane snatched the phone from his hands, examining the lock screen photo, a picture of Malik with his father at a law school fundraising event. "Fancy phone for a kid," Kane commented, turning it over in his hands. Where'd you get this? Who'd you take it from? It's my phone, Malik said, a note of frustration finally edging into his voice despite his best efforts. My father bought it for my birthday last year. Officer Voss stepped closer from the other side. Your father who works for the state government, right? The one who bought that $1 million house in Oakwood. You expect us to believe that? A car slowed as it passed. The driver watched the scene with visible concern. For a moment, Malik felt a surge of hope, thinking someone might stop, might witness what was happening. But the vehicle continued after a threatening look from Officer Voss. Look, Malik said, trying a different approach. You can call my father if you want to verify it. His number is in my phone. Or we can walk to my house. It's only a few blocks from here. Suddenly, Officer Kane's hand shot out, grabbing Malik's upper arm hard enough to leave a bruise. You trying to tell us how to do our jobs now? Seems like you need to learn some respect. Malik winced at the pain of the grip but remained still, remembering his father's most urgent warning. Do not resist, even when they're wrong, even when it's unfair. I respect your authority, sir. I'm just trying to explain the situation. The situation, Officer Voss said, moving even closer, is that we have a suspicious individual with no identification in a high-value neighborhood where he doesn't belong, giving us answers and telling us how to do our jobs. He nodded toward Kane. I think we need to continue this conversation at the station. Kane's grip tightened further as he began turning Malik toward the patrol car. Let's go, tough guy. Maybe a trip downtown will refresh your memory about where you actually live. Please, Malik said, his voice still controlled but now edged with real alarm. Just call my father. He's expecting me for dinner. He'll worry. Oh, your dad's going to worry, Kane mocked, shoving Malik forward. You should have thought about that before you decided to wander where you don't belong. Malik stumbled slightly from the force of the shove but recovered carefully, making sure not to make any movement that could be interpreted as resistance. My father is Elias Ellison, he said finally, deciding that revealing his father's identity might be his only option. He's the state attorney general. Both officers froze for a moment before exchanging glances. Officer Voss's expression darkened and his voice dropped dangerously. You think that's funny? You think making up stories about who your dad is going to help you now? I'm not lying, Malik insisted, a cold fear spreading through his body as he realized the truth was only making his situation worse. My father is Elias Ellison, the Attorney General. You can verify it if... The rest of his sentence was cut off when Officer Voss suddenly grabbed the front of his shirt and slammed him against the patrol car hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. Enough of your smart mouth, he growled, his face inches from Malik's. One more word about being the Attorney General's son, and I'll add the charge of impersonating a public official. Malik felt the cold metal of the car against his back, the officer's forearm pressing into his chest, pinning him. The situation was spiraling beyond anything he had prepared for, beyond what his father's careful instructions had covered. He could feel panic trying to rise in his throat, but he forced himself to breathe, to think. Hands on the vehicle, Officer Kane ordered, spinning Malik around sharply and spreading his feet. You know how this goes. And Malik did know, even though he had never experienced it. The ritualized placement of the body for a search, the vulnerability of the posture, the power dynamic it imposed. He spread his fingers against the cold metal of the patrol car, while Officer Kane began searching him with unnecessary roughness. Officer Voss watching with one hand resting on his gun. Kane's hands were anything but gentle as they moved over Malik's body. The pretense of a professional search was abandoned in favor of something that felt more like intimidation. Malik kept his forehead pressed against the cold metal of the cruiser, eyes closed, focusing on his breathing as he tried to ignore the uncomfortable sensation of strange hands invading his personal space. Nothing here, Kane finally announced, sounding almost disappointed. No weapons, no drugs. Voss grunted in response. Turn around, he ordered. Malik obeyed slowly, careful to keep his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The officer's face was flushed with what appeared to be growing anger, as if Malik's lack of contraband were somehow a personal offense. So you're still sticking with that story about living in Oakwood? About your dad being the big-shot Attorney General? It's the truth, Malik answered, keeping his voice leveled despite the fluttering in his stomach. My father is Elias Ellison. We live at 347 Oakwood Drive. You can verify it. Voss's hand shot forward, shoving Malik back against the patrol car. I told you to cut that out, You think we're stupid? You think we don't know who the Attorney General is? Malik felt his back slam against the vehicle, the impact sending a jolt of pain along his spine. He swallowed hard, fighting to maintain his composure even as his heart hammered against his ribs. I'm not lying. Please just call the number in my phone or take me home. It's less than 5 minutes from here. You hear this, kid? Voss said, turning to his partner with an exaggerated expression of disbelief. Still talking about living in Oakwood like he's some kind of player or something. Kane shook his head, a mocking smile at the corners of his mouth. Yeah, and I'm the damn governor. Listen, kid, drop the act. Tell us where you really live, where you got that fancy phone, and maybe we can work something out. I've told the truth, Malik insisted, feeling a rare flash of frustration break through his carefully maintained calm. This is my neighborhood. I'm just trying to get home. Voss stepped closer, his hot breath against Malik's face. You're calling us liars, boy. You think we don't know who belongs in this neighborhood and who doesn't? The word boy hit Malik like a physical blow, loaded with centuries of history and degradation he had been taught about since he was old enough to understand it. He bit the inside of his cheek, forcing down the words that threatened to spill out. Nothing to say now? Kane mocked, circling Malik to position himself at his side. Cat got your tongue? Malik took a deep breath. I'd like to call my father, he said, his voice lower now but firm. I have a right to make a call. Voss's laugh was harsh and humorless. You watch too much television, kid. You're not under arrest yet, so you don't have a right to a call. Right now you're just a suspicious person being questioned. And so far all you've done is lie to officers and give us attitude. I haven't lied about anything, Malik answered, his patience beginning to fray despite his best efforts. He glanced at Voss's badge number, trying to memorize it in the dim light. Officer Voss, please just— Now you're looking at my badge? Voss interrupted, raising his voice. You planning to file a complaint? Is that your game? No, sir, Hands behind your back, Voss growled suddenly, reaching for his handcuffs. You're being detained for further questioning. Malik felt a cold wave of terror wash through his body. On what charge? He asked as he began to comply, knowing that resistance would only make things worse. Suspicious activity, possible trespassing, and now interfering with an officer, Kane answered, grabbing Malik's arm and yanking it roughly behind his back. Plus, you've got a real attitude problem. Malik winced as the handcuffs tightened around his wrists with deliberate excess. This is he murmured under his breath, immediately regretting the slip as Kane's grip tightened painfully on his arm. What was that? Kane demanded, his voice dangerously soft. You got something to say? Malik shook his head slightly. No, sir. I didn't hear you, Kane continued, spinning Malik to face him. You said this is a what? You think you can disrespect us while we're doing our jobs? I didn't mean— The rest of his sentence was cut off when Kane's fist connected with his cheekbone. The force of the blow snapped Malik's head to the side and sent him stumbling backward against the patrol car. Pain exploded across the side of his face. His vision blurred momentarily as he struggled to stay upright. You need to learn a little respect, Kane growled, advancing on him again. Malik raised his cuffed hands instinctively, a reflexive gesture of self-protection that Kane interpreted as resistance. He's resisting, Kane shouted, lunging forward and grabbing Malik by the collar. I'm not, Malik managed to say, but his protest was lost as Voss joined the fray. Both officers now forced him to the ground. Malik felt his knees hit the pavement hard, then his shoulder as they shoved him down. Disoriented and hurting, he struggled to find a position that would not leave him completely vulnerable, a movement the officers immediately seized upon. Stop resisting! Voss shouted loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, creating a narrative that had no relation to reality. His knee pressed into Malik's back, driving the air from his lungs, while Kane held his head against the rough concrete of the sidewalk. I'm not resisting, Malik gasped, almost unable to breathe under Voss's weight. He could feel warm wetness on his face, blood from where his cheek had split open from Kane's punch. Shut up, Kane hissed, pressing his face harder into the ground. You keep fighting and it's going to get a lot worse. The absurdity of the accusation, that he, handcuffed and pinned by two adult men, was fighting them, might have been ridiculous in another context. But here, with his face bleeding and his chest compressed to the point that every breath was a struggle, Malik understood with terrifying clarity how situations like this ended for young men who looked like him. The memory of his father's voice cut through his panic. Stay alive. Nothing else matters. Just stay alive and get home. So Malik forced himself to go rigid under the officer's brutal hold, surrendering completely even though every instinct screamed at him to protect himself. That's better, Voss said after a moment, his voice revealing a sick satisfaction that made Malik's stomach turn. Now maybe you're ready to tell us the truth about who you are and what you're doing here. My name is Malik Ellison, he repeated, his words slightly slurred by the swelling already beginning around his mouth. My father is Elias Ellison, the state attorney general. We live at 347 Oakwood Drive. Voss grabbed a handful of Malik's hair, yanking his head back painfully. You're still sticking with that story, even now? It's the truth, Malik insisted, blinking blood out of his eye where it had run from the cut on his cheek. Please just take me home or call my father. The officers exchanged looks over his fallen body. Something passed between them that Malik could not decipher. Then Voss nodded and they hauled him roughly to his feet. All right, tough guy, Kane said, shoving Malik toward the patrol car. You want to play it this way? Fine. Let's go downtown and sort this out. As they approached the vehicle, Malik saw a woman walking her dog on the opposite side of the street, watching the scene with clear concern. For a moment their eyes met and Malik felt a flash of hope. Ma'am, he called, his voice strained but clear across the street. Could you please call Elias Ellison at the Attorney General's office? Tell him Malik is... A hard blow to his kidney cut him off, driving the air from his lungs and making his knees buckle. Shut up, Voss hissed, forcing Malik's head down as he shoved him into the back seat of the patrol car. Nobody's calling anybody. The door slammed with a finality that made Malik's stomach drop. Through the window he saw the woman still standing there uncertainly, while the officers spoke to her briefly before returning to the vehicle. Whatever they told her seemed to have worked. She continued on her way, though she looked back once with what appeared to be concern. Inside the patrol car, separated from the officers by a plastic partition, Malik finally allowed the full weight of his situation to settle over him. His face pulsed where Kane had struck him. Blood still seeped from the cut on his cheekbone that would surely leave a visible bruise. His wrists burned from the too tight handcuffs, and his back ached where Voss's knee had pressed. The reality of what was happening settled on him like a physical weight as he gently touched his face, wincing at the tenderness of what was already swelling into a significant bruise. He thought of his father waiting at home, dinner growing cold, growing more worried with every passing minute without word from his son. Part of him wanted to scream, to unleash his fury at the injustice of it all, but the pragmatic lessons his father had instilled kept him silent. This was not the place to defend himself. As the engine started and the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Malik closed his eyes and reached for the deep well of composure his father had taught him to cultivate, built over years of carefully worded warnings and painfully honest conversations. His father's voice echoed in his mind. This is not about justice. This is about surviving. You get through it, you get home, and then we fight the right way. The patrol car accelerated down the quiet suburban street, carrying Malik farther from his home with every moment that passed. In the growing distance between where he was and where he should be, Malik made himself a silent promise. He would survive this. And what those officers had done to him would not go unanswered. His father had taught him about justice as thoroughly as he had taught him about survival. And soon those officers would learn exactly what that meant. The ride to the police station passed in a blur of pain and rising anxiety. Malik remained silent in the back seat, the copper taste of blood filling his mouth where his lip had split. Through the partition he could hear Officers Voss and Kane laughing, their casual conversation a jarring contrast to the violence they had just inflicted on him. His face pulsed where Kane's fist had struck his cheekbone, and he could feel the area swelling rapidly, his eye already beginning to close from the inflammation. Sure he's not going to keep running his mouth about being the Attorney General's kid? Voss commented, loud enough for Malik to hear. These neighborhood kids think having money means they can talk to officers however they want. Rich or not, they all bleed the same, Kane answered with a laugh that made Malik's skin crawl. Though I gotta say, for a basketball player, he went down pretty easy. The patrol car pulled into the station parking lot. Harsh fluorescent light spilled from the building onto the pavement as they parked. Voss opened the rear door and yanked Malik out with unnecessary force, causing him to stumble when his feet hit the ground. "Come on, tough guy," Voss growled, shoving him toward the entrance. "Time to process you properly." The interior of the station was brightly lit and busy despite the hour. Officers at desks, detainees in waiting areas, phones ringing. Several heads turned as the officers marched Malik through the main area, his handcuffed wrists and bloodied face drawing curious stares. Malik kept his eyes forward, trying to project dignity despite his appearance, fully aware that every person he passed was forming judgments based solely on what they saw. A young black man in custody who had obviously resisted arrest. "Got a live one, Sergeant," Kane called as they approached the processing desk. "Suspicious activity, trespassing, resisting arrest, and assault on an officer." The desk sergeant, an older man with salt and pepper hair and deep lines around his mouth, looked up from his papers. His gaze moved from the officers to Malik, lingering on the young man's swollen face. "Assaulted an officer, huh?" he asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "Which one of you?" "Both," Kane answered. Voss replied more softly. "The kid went crazy when we questioned him about being in Oakwood Estates. Started claiming he lives there, that his dad is the Attorney General. When we tried to detain him, he took a swing at Kane." The sergeant's eyebrows rose slightly as he took in Malik's athletic but lean frame compared to the two bulky officers. "Is that true?" he asked, this time directing the question at Malik. Before Malik could answer, Kane's hand tightened painfully on his shoulder. "Don't waste your time, Sergeant. The kid's been telling lies all night." The sergeant held his gaze on Malik a moment longer, something unreadable in his expression, before returning his attention to the paperwork. "Name?" he asked, pen in hand. "Malik Ellison," Malik answered, his voice steady despite the dull pain radiating from his face. "I live at 347 Oakwood Drive. My father is Elias Ellison, the state attorney general. I was walking home from basketball practice when these officers—" Kane's grip tightened painfully on his shoulder again. "Same story. Unbelievable," Kane commented. The sergeant's pen remained suspended over the form. "Ellison, son of Elias Ellison," the sergeant said, looking at him more carefully now, studying his features despite the swelling and blood. "That's what he says," Voss said with disdain. "He's been saying it since we picked him up. The kid's delusional." The sergeant frowned slightly. "You verify his identity?" "He didn't have ID," Kane said quickly. "Convenient, right?" "I was coming from basketball practice," Malik repeated, sensing he might have a possible ally in the sergeant. "My wallet is at home. Please just call my father or take me home to verify it." Voss stepped forward, placing himself physically between Malik and the desk. "Look, Sergeant, we've got a non-cooperative suspect who is casing houses in Oakwood, who resisted arrest and assaulted officers. We need to process him, not listen to more of his fantasies." The sergeant held Voss's gaze for a long moment before nodding slightly. "Process him, then. Full booking procedure." Malik felt his hope deflate as Voss grabbed his arm again, guiding him toward a side hallway. "This way, Junior," he said mockingly. "Time for your mugshot. Smile pretty for Daddy." They took him to a processing area where a bored-looking technician waited to take his photo and fingerprints. The routine was impersonal and efficient. Stand against the wall, look straight ahead, turn left, turn right, place fingers on the scanner, all while Malik remained handcuffed and increasingly aware of how the system was designed to strip him of his dignity. "Pretty," Kane commented as the mugshot appeared on the technician's screen, showing Malik's swollen face in harsh detail. "That's going to look great on your college applications." From the processing area, they took him to an interrogation room, a small, windowless space with a metal table bolted to the floor and 3 uncomfortable-looking chairs. Voss shoved Malik roughly into one of the chairs before removing the handcuffs, only to recuff one wrist to a metal loop on the table. "Wait here," he ordered unnecessarily. "We'll be back after we finish the paperwork." The door slammed shut, leaving Malik alone in the sterile room. The fluorescent ceiling light hummed incessantly, casting harsh shadows that emphasized the institutional bleakness. Malik carefully touched his face, wincing at the tenderness of his cheekbone. The skin had split where Kane's knuckles had struck, leaving a laceration that had mostly stopped bleeding but would probably need stitches. He tried to organize his thoughts, to plan what he would say when the officers returned. But fatigue and pain made concentration difficult. What had begun as a routine walk home from practice had become a nightmare that seemed to worsen with every passing minute. He thought of his father, who would surely be worried by now. Dinner would have gone cold. Calls to his cell phone would go unanswered. How long would it be before his father started making calls, activating the resources at his disposal to find his missing son? The door opened abruptly, startling Malik from his thoughts as Officers Voss and Kane re-entered, accompanied by a third man in civilian clothes, a detective judging by the badge on his belt. The detective's eyes went straight to Malik's face, his expression hardening slightly before smoothing into professional neutrality. "I'm Detective Rivera," he began, taking a seat across from Malik, while the officers stood like sentinels on either side of the door. "I understand we've had some problems tonight." "Yes, sir," Malik answered, straightening in his chair despite the discomfort. "These officers stopped me while I was walking home from basketball practice. When I explained who I was and that I live in the neighborhood, they accused me of lying, handcuffed me, and assaulted me." He pointed to his face with his free hand. "This was from Officer Kane's fist, not from any resistance on my part." Voss stepped forward, his face flushed. "That's not what happened, Detective. This kid was acting suspicious in Oakwood Estates. When we questioned him, he became belligerent and then physically resistant when we tried to detain him." "I did not resist," Malik countered firmly. "I was complying with all instructions. Officer Kane hit me after I muttered something under my breath. Then both of them threw me to the ground while I was already handcuffed." Detective Rivera's gaze moved between Malik and the officers. His expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Quite different accounts," he observed neutrally. "What were you doing in Oakwood Estates?" "I live there," Malik repeated, struggling to keep frustration out of his voice. "347 Oakwood Drive with my father, Elias Ellison, the Attorney General." Rivera did not ask a question or accept the answer. "Yes, sir." Rivera turned to the officers. "Did you attempt to verify his address or identity?" Kane shifted his stance. "The kid had no identification. Said his wallet was at home. Convenient excuse." "I was coming from basketball practice," Malik explained, feeling like he was saying it for the 100th time. "I didn't take my wallet to the gym." "And you didn't offer to walk him to the address he gave to verify it?" Rivera asked the officers, his tone carefully professional. "Detective," Voss interrupted, "we had a suspicious individual in a high-value neighborhood who couldn't produce identification and became increasingly belligerent when questioned. Standard procedure is to bring him in for proper identification." Rivera nodded slowly before returning his attention to Malik. "You have a right to a phone call. Who would you like to contact?" Before Malik could answer, the interrogation room door burst open, and the desk sergeant appeared with an unusually tense expression. "Detective," he said, ignoring the officers, "the young man's phone call has already been made. His father is here." A brief silence followed the announcement, broken by Kane's dismissive snort. "Sure, and I'm the commissioner." The sergeant's face remained grave. "State Attorney General Elias Ellison is in the lobby demanding to see his son and the officers who arrested him. He's already called the chief." The color drained from Voss's face as Rivera stood abruptly. "Uncuff him," the detective ordered with new urgency in his voice. "Now." Kane hesitated, looking at Voss, who appeared frozen in place. "Detective, procedure requires—" Kane began. "I said uncuff him, officer." Rivera's tone left no room for argument. As the handcuff was removed from Malik's wrist, the door opened again, and Elias Ellison walked in. The Attorney General's presence filled the small room. He was a tall man with the same athletic build as his son, dressed in a dark suit that still looked sharp despite the late hour. His eyes went immediately to Malik's face, and for a brief moment the carefully controlled expression of the state's top law enforcement officer cracked, revealing pure paternal rage. "Malik," he said, his voice tight, "are you all right?" "I'm okay, Dad," Malik answered, though the relief of seeing his father nearly undid the composure he had fought so hard to maintain. Elias turned to the officers, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Which one of you put hands on my son?" Neither officer spoke. Detective Rivera cleared his throat. "Mr. Attorney General, we're still sorting out the details of what happened." "The details are written on my son's face," Elias interrupted. "I want both of these officers' names, badge numbers, and body camera footage, immediately. Captain Naomi Brooks, who had entered behind Elias, stepped forward. Attorney General, we've already secured the body camera footage. Both officers are being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Administrative leave is not enough, Elias said coldly. I want criminal charges, assault on a minor, false arrest, filing false reports. And I want a full review of every complaint ever filed against these two. Officer Kane finally found his voice. Sir, with all due respect, your son was resisting. My son was walking home from basketball practice. Elias cut him off. He identified himself. He complied. And you beat him anyway. He took a step closer to Kane. I am familiar with the realities of police work, Officer Kane. Just as I am familiar with your service record. 3 excessive force complaints in recent years, all involving young black men, all dismissed during internal review. The color drained from Kane's face. You've been investigating my record? I am the Attorney General, Elias reminded him simply. And yes, I have reviewed both your record and Officer Voss's. What I found suggests a pattern, not an isolated incident. Captain Brooks, who had returned after escorting Voss to surrender his badge and weapon, stepped forward from her position by the door. Officer Kane, you are being placed on administrative leave effective immediately pending a criminal investigation. You will surrender your badge and service weapon before leaving the building. Criminal investigation? Kane repeated, his voice rising with indignation. For doing my job? Your job, Elias interrupted, visibly losing patience, does not include assaulting minors, nor does it include filing false reports to cover those assaults. These are criminal actions, Officer Kane, and they will be treated as such. Kane's gaze shifted to Malik, something ugly flashing in his expression. So the Attorney General's kid gets special treatment. Must be nice having Daddy clean up your messes. Malik tensed at the accusation, but Elias's response came first, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Let me be perfectly clear, Officer Kane. This is not about special treatment. This is about holding an officer accountable who abused his power and assaulted a minor. The fact that the minor is my son means I have the resources and the position to make sure that accountability happens quickly and transparently. But make no mistake, this would be happening either way. He leaned slightly forward, his imposing height combined with the authority of his office creating a presence that seemed to fill the room. And if you think for one moment that I would not pursue the same justice for any other young person subjected to similar treatment, you fundamentally misunderstand both my office and my character. The silence that followed was broken only when Captain Brooks stepped forward again. Officer Kane, please come with me to surrender your badge and service weapon. For a moment it seemed Kane might refuse. His jaw worked silently, hands forming fists on the table's surface, but whatever defiance remained in him withered under Elias Ellison's unrelenting gaze. He stood slowly, shoulders slumped in defeat, as the full weight of his situation finally registered. This isn't right, he muttered more to himself than to the others as he followed Brooks toward the door. This shouldn't be how it goes. As Kane passed, Malik spoke one last time, his voice firm despite the emotion tightening his throat. Officer Kane, I want you to know something. If I hadn't been the Attorney General's son, you would have gotten away with it, the same way you did those other 3 times. That's what's not right. Kane offered no response beyond darkening his already stormy expression as he was led from the room, leaving Malik and Elias alone with Detective Rivera, who began gathering his materials from the table. That went exactly as expected, Rivera observed grimly. Neither of them sees the fundamental problem with their actions. In their minds, the only mistake was choosing the wrong target. Elias nodded, his professional demeanor softening slightly now that the confrontations were over. Malik, how are you feeling? We can go home if you need to rest. I'm fine, Malik assured him, though fatigue was beginning to weigh heavily on his shoulders. What happens now? Elias checked his watch before answering. The chief should be arriving soon. I want to review the next steps of the investigation with him personally. Then we need to prepare for the press conference at midday. Press conference? Malik repeated, suddenly remembering that his father's position meant this incident would not remain private for long. Yes, Elias confirmed, his expression softening further as he looked at his son. This isn't just about what happened to you, Malik. It's about making sure it doesn't happen to others. That means making it public, making it matter. He paused, studying Malik's bruised face. "But you don't have to participate if you don't want to. Your privacy." "I want to be there," Malik interrupted with quiet determination. "People need to see what happened. They need to know." Elias nodded, pride briefly overriding the anger and concern that had dominated his expression since he arrived at the station. "All right, let's make sure they see it." As they left the conference room, the administrative floor had taken on the charged atmosphere of crisis management. Officers moved with heightened urgency. Phones rang constantly. Whispered conversations stopped abruptly when the Attorney General and his son passed. Through the glass walls of the chief's office, Malik could see Captain Brooks already briefing the newly arrived police chief, whose grave expression suggested he understood the seriousness of the situation. What had begun as a routine walk home from basketball practice had transformed overnight into something much larger, a potential turning point in the ongoing fight for accountability and justice. As Malik followed his father toward the next confrontation, he felt the weight of that responsibility settling on his young shoulders alongside the lingering pain of his injuries. This was no longer just about him. It was about everyone else who did not have an attorney general for a father, who did not have the power to make their voices heard. For them, Malik would stand tall and let his bruised face tell the story so many others had never been able to share. The chief's office offered a brief respite from the growing chaos of the station, its thick wooden door muffling the increasingly frantic activity beyond. Chief Victor Lang, a career officer with decades of service who had taken command only recently, sat behind his desk looking visibly uncomfortable as Elias Ellison outlined what would happen next. "The investigation will be handled directly by my office to avoid any appearance of conflict," Elias explained, his tone making clear this was not a suggestion. "I've already sent an internal affairs team to begin collecting evidence and statements. The body camera footage will be secured and analyzed by independent experts, and I want a complete review of both officers' service records, including the complaints that were dismissed during internal review." Chief Lang nodded gravely, clearly recognizing the political and legal tsunami heading for his department. "Of course, Attorney General. We'll cooperate fully with the investigation. I want to personally express my apologies for what happened to your son." While the adults continued their discussion, Malik moved to the window overlooking the station parking lot, where several news vans had already gathered. Word had traveled fast in the state capital. He gently pressed his fingertips against his swollen cheek, the pain a persistent reminder of the previous night's encounter, as he tried to process the rapid sequence of events unfolding around him. "Malik." His father's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "The chief has offered us his office for a few minutes of privacy before the press conference. I need to make some calls, but I'll be right outside if you need me." As the others left, closing the door behind them, Malik collapsed into one of the visitor chairs, suddenly aware of the deep fatigue that adrenaline had been holding at bay. Elias took a seat beside him rather than in the imposing desk chair. The simple act of sitting at the same level subtly softened their positions in a way that made Malik feel seen not only as a son, but as a young man with his own agency. "How are you really feeling?" Elias asked, his voice softer than it had been all morning. The professional persona of the Attorney General was momentarily set aside. Malik considered the question, searching for an honest answer beyond the automatic, "I'm fine," that had carried him through the confrontations. "I'm tired," he admitted finally, "and angry, and confused, I guess." "Confused about what?" "About how fast things flipped. Last night those officers had all the power. They could do whatever they wanted to me, and there was nothing I could do about it." Malik gestured vaguely toward the station beyond the office walls. "And now everything's reversed just because of who you are." Elias nodded slowly, understanding the deeper question beneath his son's observation. "It doesn't escape me that if you weren't my son, this would be unfolding very differently. The system works differently depending on who you are, what resources you have, what connections. That's the very definition of injustice." "And what about everyone else?" Malik asked, the question that had been troubling him since the moment his father appeared at the station. "The ones who don't have the Attorney General for a father?" Elias's expression grew thoughtful. "That's exactly why what we do next matters so much. This isn't just about getting justice for you, Malik. It's about using what happened to create accountability that goes beyond this particular incident. He leaned slightly forward, intensifying his gaze. There's a window right now, a moment when people will pay attention because of who we are. The question is, how do we use that window? Outside the office, activity in the station continued to escalate. Through the glass walls, Malik could see Captain Brooks directing officers with increasing urgency. Phones rang constantly. Whispered conversations took place in corners. A group of people in suits whom Malik recognized as internal affairs investigators had arrived and were setting up in a conference room, their presence causing visible discomfort among the regular officers. "What's your plan?" Malik asked, turning his attention back to his father. "First, criminal charges against both officers," Elias answered without hesitation. "Assault, filing false reports, civil rights violations. No paid administrative leave. No quiet resignations to avoid consequences. They face the full legal process." "They'll fight," Malik observed. "They will," Elias agreed. "That's why the second part is just as important. A thorough review of departmental policies and training with public hearings where people can share similar experiences." His expression softened as he looked at his son. "And that's where you have to make a decision." "What decision?" "About how public you want to be in this process. Your testimony, your face." Elias gestured toward Malik's visible injuries. "These have power. They tell a story that statistics and policies can't convey. But putting yourself in that position has a cost. Scrutiny, exposure, questions about every aspect of your life from people looking to discredit you." Malik considered this, understanding the weight of the decision. His father was offering him an out, a way to seek justice without becoming the public face of it. The easier path would be to let the legal process unfold from the background, return to school and basketball and the normal life of a teenager. But the memory of Officer Kane's words echoed in his mind. So the Attorney General's kid gets special treatment. The accusation had stung precisely because it contained a grain of truth. His father's position meant justice for him. But what about everyone else who had faced similar or worse treatment without resources? "I want to speak," Malik decided, his voice growing more certain with each word. "At the press conference, at the hearings, wherever it helps. People need to see what happened." A flash of pride crossed Elias's face, though concern lingered in his eyes. "You're sure? Once we make this public, there's no going back. The media, the officers, defense attorneys, they'll come at you with everything." "I'm sure," Malik confirmed, straightening in his chair despite his fatigue. "You always taught me that having privilege means using it to help others. This is how I can do that." Elias nodded, reaching out to place a hand on his son's shoulder. "Then we'll do it together. But remember, you set the boundaries. If it becomes too much, you tell me and we adjust." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation, and Diane Sato, Elias's chief of staff, entered with an air of controlled urgency. "Sir, the press conference is scheduled for midday. We've confirmed all the major networks, and the governor called again. He's supporting us but wants to be briefed before you speak." She looked at Malik, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "How are you feeling, Malik?" "I'm fine," he assured her, the answer becoming more automatic with each repetition. "The body camera footage has been downloaded to a secure server," Diane continued, turning back to Elias. "Adrian thinks we should show selected clips at the press conference with your approval." Elias considered it before looking at Malik. "That's your decision. It's your experience." "Show it," Malik said without hesitation. "All of it. People need to see exactly what happened." Diane nodded and began taking notes on her tablet. Another knock came at the door. Captain Brooks entered with a grave expression. "Attorney General, the chief asked me to inform you that Officers Voss and Kane have retained counsel. The police union representative is also requesting to speak with you before the press conference." "Tell them I'll see them after," Elias answered firmly. "This is not negotiable." Captain Brooks nodded, clearly relieved not to be caught in the middle of what was rapidly becoming a departmental crisis. "Yes, sir. Also, the investigative team has requested the officers' complete service records, including all civilian complaints." "Good," Elias said, rising from his chair. "Make sure they get everything. No redactions. No conveniently missing files." When Brooks left, Malik also stood, wincing slightly at the stiffness in his muscles from the night spent in the holding cell. The clock on the wall showed a little more than an hour until the press conference, an hour until his private trauma became a public record. His bruised face would become a symbol of something much larger than one teenager's encounter with two officers. "Ready?" Elias asked, studying his son's face with paternal concern. Malik nodded, drawing himself up fully despite the fatigue and pain. "Ready. Together." They left the chief's office toward the storm waiting for them. Father and son united not only by blood but by a shared commitment to ensure that what had happened the night before would have consequences that reached far beyond their family. The press room at police headquarters was filled beyond capacity when they arrived. Reporters from local and national media were packed shoulder to shoulder, cameras and microphones ready. A murmur ran through the crowd as Elias entered with Malik at his side. The teenager's bruised face drew every eye in the room. Elias approached the podium with the familiar posture of the state's chief law enforcement officer, fully in professional mode, while Malik stood slightly to the side, back straight despite his fatigue. Camera flashes created a strobe-like effect as photographers captured image after image of father and son, the Attorney General, and the living evidence of police brutality that could no longer be denied. "Last night," Elias began, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room, "my 17-year-old son, Malik, was walking home from basketball practice when he was stopped by officers Tristan Kane and Grant Voss of this department. Despite correctly identifying himself and complying with their instructions, he was handcuffed, physically assaulted, and falsely arrested on fabricated charges." Elias gestured toward Malik, whose bruised face spoke more eloquently than words about what had occurred. The incident was captured in its entirety by the officers' body cameras, leaving no doubt about the facts. While my son was handcuffed and cooperating, Officer Kane struck him in the face with enough force to cause significant injury. Both officers then forced him to the ground, filed false reports claiming he had resisted arrest, and processed fraudulent charges. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras flashed continuously. Tension in the room rose as Elias continued. "As Attorney General, I have directed my office to file criminal charges against both officers before the end of today. They have been placed on unpaid administrative leave and have surrendered their badges and service weapons. But this is only the beginning." Elias's expression hardened as he leaned slightly toward the microphone. What happened to Malik is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of systemic problems within law enforcement that have been allowed to persist for far too long. Today, I am announcing a comprehensive investigation into this department's policies, training, and complaint handling procedures. We will hold public hearings where citizens can share similar experiences, and I am putting every department in this state on notice. There will be zero tolerance for misconduct, excessive force, or civil rights violations under my watch. The room erupted in shouted questions. Cameras clicked frantically as reporters competed for attention. Elias raised a hand for silence before continuing. "Before I take questions, I want to give my son the opportunity to speak directly about his experience." He stepped aside from the podium, placing a supportive hand on Malik's shoulder. When the teenager stepped forward, the room fell silent again. The assembled press corps seemed to collectively hold its breath as Malik faced them. Despite his youth and the visible evidence of trauma on his face, he carried himself with remarkable composure as he looked out at the sea of anxious journalists. "Last night," Malik began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I was walking home from basketball practice when two police officers stopped me. I told them who I was and where I lived. I followed every instruction they gave me. I kept my hands visible. I did not resist." He gently touched his bruised cheek. "This happened anyway." The simplicity of the statement hung in the air, powerful in its bare truth. Malik continued after a brief pause. "I am here today because my father is the Attorney General. That means I have resources and support that many others do not. But what happened to me happens to people in this state and in this country every day. The only difference is that most of them do not have someone with power to make others listen." His voice grew stronger, more certain with each word. "So I am asking you to listen now, not only to my story, but to all the stories that have not been told, because the people who lived them did not have an Attorney General for a father. What happened to me was wrong. What happens to other people like me is wrong, and it has to stop. The room remained silent for a moment as Malik stepped back, the impact of his words settling over the assembled press. Then, like a dam breaking, questions erupted from every corner, reporters shouting over one another for attention. Elias returned to the podium, answering questions with professional precision, while Malik remained at his side, his bruised face a silent testament that no amount of official explanation or technical language could erase what had occurred. Outside the press room, beyond the walls of the police station, the first broadcasts were already hitting the airwaves. Malik's injured face appeared on screens across the state, his measured words carrying the reality of police brutality into homes and offices where the truth could no longer be ignored. Misconduct could no longer be dismissed as abstract statistics or isolated incidents. What had begun as one teenager's traumatic encounter was transforming in real time into a catalyst for change that would reach far beyond a single night or a single arrest. As Elias continued addressing the press, Malik stood tall beside him, understanding that his private pain had become something larger, a responsibility, a platform, an opportunity to speak for those whose voices had been silenced or ignored. The weight of that responsibility settled on his young shoulders alongside the lingering pain of his injuries. But as the cameras continued to flash and the questions flew, he felt a growing certainty that this was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. In the days that followed, Malik stood in front of the bathroom mirror, gently touching the fading bruise on his cheek. The deep purple had softened to yellows and greens at the edges, the swelling nearly gone, though the memory remained vivid in his mind. From the kitchen downstairs he could hear the familiar sounds of his mother preparing breakfast while his father's voice carried from the home office, engaged in yet another call related to the investigation that had consumed the Ellison household since that night. The previous days had unfolded at a dizzying pace. Officers Voss and Kane had been formally charged with assault, filing false reports, and civil rights violations. The announcement came only hours after the press conference, accompanied by their mugshots that now appeared alongside Malik's bruised face in news coverage across the country. The police union had initially threatened legal action before retreating into damage control mode when public opinion turned decisively against the officers after the release of selected body camera clips. Chief Lang had announced his early retirement 3 days later, framing it as a way to create space for new leadership, though everyone recognized it for the political casualty it was. Captain Brooks had been named interim chief with a mandate for reform that included implementing body cameras for all officers, revising use-of-force policies, and establishing an independent civilian review board. Malik came down the stairs slowly, each step a conscious choice to move forward, despite the physical and emotional aftermath of the encounter. In the kitchen, his mother looked up from the stove with a warm smile that could not quite hide the protective concern that had characterized her interactions with him since that night. "How are you feeling this morning?" Elise asked, sliding a plate of pancakes onto the counter. "Better," Malik answered, the response more honest than it had been in previous days. "The pain's almost gone." His father entered the kitchen, ending a call with a "keep me informed," before pocketing his phone and joining them. Elias's expression brightened slightly as he looked at his son. "Ready for today?" Malik nodded, though uncertainty flickered briefly across his features. Today marked his return to school after a period of absence, a return complicated by his new visibility as both victim and symbol. His face had appeared on every news channel, his words quoted in newspapers and shared across social media. What had been private trauma had become a public narrative far beyond his control. "You don't have to do this interview tonight if you're not ready," Elise reminded him, referring to the national news program that had requested an exclusive interview with the Ellison family. "No one would blame you for wanting more time." Malik shook his head slightly. "The longer we wait, the easier it will be for people to forget or move on. We need to keep the pressure while people are still paying attention." Elias studied his son with a mixture of pride and concern. "You've taken on a lot for someone your age. It's okay to set boundaries, to take space for yourself in all of this." "I know," Malik acknowledged, the maturity in his voice belying his years. "But every time I think about stepping back, I remember what you always taught me, that having privilege means using it to help others. This is how I can do that right now." The drive to school passed mostly in silence, both father and son lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the campus, Malik saw the news van parked across the street. Despite the school administration's efforts to keep the media at bay, several students lingered near the entrance, their curious glances following Elias's car as it pulled into the drop-off zone. "I'll pick you up after practice," Elias said as Malik gathered his backpack. "Call me if you need anything before then." Malik nodded, steeling himself for what waited beyond the car door. "I will." The school hallways fell into whispers as he made his way to his locker. The fading bruise on his face drew every eye despite his classmates' subtle attempts to look away. Some offered awkward smiles or brief words of support. Others seemed unsure how to approach him, as if his experience had created an invisible barrier between them. It was not until he reached the gym for basketball practice after classes that Malik felt something close to normalcy return. Coach Langford gathered the team, addressing the elephant in the room with his characteristic directness. "Malik has been through something none of you should ever have to experience," he stated bluntly. "He's here today because he's strong enough to keep going, and because basketball is about team, about having each other's backs no matter what. So we're going to give him the space to be just another player on this court, and we're going to back him up the way teammates should." The simple statement seemed to break the tension, allowing the team to return to their familiar rhythms as practice began. On the court, focusing only on the ball, the movement, and the play unfolding around him, Malik found a temporary refuge from the weight of everything else. For those 2 hours he was not a symbol, not a victim, not a catalyst for change. He was simply a basketball player finding his way back to himself through the game he loved. After practice, he found his father waiting in the parking lot as promised, accompanied by Adrian Torres, whose presence suggested the legal machinery continued moving at full speed. "How was it?" Elias asked as Malik slid into the passenger seat. "Better than I expected," Malik admitted. "Once we started playing, everything else disappeared for a while." Adrian smiled from the back seat. "Glad to hear it. Finding those moments of normalcy is important." As they drove home, Adrian updated them on the investigation's progress. Internal Affairs had uncovered 12 similar complaints against officers Voss and Kane over the previous years, all dismissed during internal review despite multiple witnesses and, in 2 cases, hospital records documenting injuries. The pattern established a damning picture of departmental negligence and possible complicity in covering up excessive force. "The prosecution is considering additional charges based on these findings," Adrian explained, "and we've been contacted by attorneys representing 3 more young men with nearly identical experiences. They're willing to testify at next month's hearings." Malik listened in silence, understanding that what had happened to him was expanding into something much larger, a potential turning point in the ongoing fight for police accountability in his state. The weight of that responsibility pressed heavily on him, but alongside it grew a sense of purpose that helped balance the load. At home, Elise had prepared dinner while coordinating with the network producers for the evening's interview. The dining room had been rearranged to accommodate cameras and lights, transforming their private space into a temporary studio. As the technical crew made final adjustments, the family gathered in the kitchen, a moment of quiet before stepping back into the public eye. "Remember," Elias advised, his hand resting supportively on Malik's shoulder, "you only share what you're comfortable sharing. If any question feels too personal or you need a break, just say so." Malik nodded, drawing a deep breath to center himself. "I'm ready." The interview unfolded with professional smoothness. The veteran anchor guided them through their account of that night and its aftermath. Malik spoke with the same measured dignity he had shown at the press conference, neither minimizing the trauma of his experience nor allowing it to define him completely. "A lot of people have called you brave for speaking out," the anchor observed toward the end of this segment. "How do you see your role in this developing conversation about police reform?" Malik considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't see it as bravery so much as responsibility. What happened to me happens to others who don't have the resources or the platform I have. If talking about my experience helps create change that prevents this from happening to someone else, then that's what I need to do." "And you, Attorney General," the anchor continued, turning to Elias, How do you balance your role as the state's chief law enforcement officer with being the father of a young man who experienced police brutality firsthand? Elias's expression remained composed, though his eyes betrayed the emotion beneath. There is no contradiction between those roles. As Attorney General, my job is to uphold the law and ensure justice for all citizens. As a father, my job is to protect my son and teach him to stand up for what is right. In this situation, those responsibilities align perfectly. What happened to Malik was wrong, both legally and morally. Addressing that wrong serves both justice and my son. After the cameras were packed away and the crew left, the family settled into the living room, the familiar space reclaimed from its temporary conversion into a television studio. The emotional impact of the day's events, returning to school, basketball practice, the interview, finally caught up with Malik as he sank onto the couch beside his father. "You did well today," Elias said quietly. "Better than well. I'm proud of you." Malik nodded, fatigue evident in the slope of his shoulders. "Do you think this will make a difference? All of this?" Elias considered the question with the reflection it deserved. "Yes," he answered finally. "Maybe not as much as it should. Maybe not as quickly as we hope. Systems resist change, especially when that change threatens established power. But what happened to you, and our response to it, has created a moment where real reform is possible." He gestured toward the window beyond which they could see the city lights stretching into the distance. "Out there right now, there are police officers thinking twice about how they interact with young people who look like you. There are department chiefs reviewing their policies. There are legislators considering legislation. And most importantly, there are young people seeing that standing up and speaking out can lead to consequences for those who abuse their power." Elise joined them, sitting on Malik's other side and taking his hand in hers. Change happens in moments like these, when something that has been invisible to many becomes impossible to ignore. Your voice helped make that happen. Malik absorbed their words, finding comfort in the sense of purpose they offered. The bruise on his face would fade completely in time, but the impact of what had occurred would extend far beyond his personal experience. In the aftermath of trauma, he had found not only resilience but determination, a resolve to ensure that his story became part of a larger narrative of accountability and change. Weeks later, Malik stood at the free throw line in the final minutes of a tied game against their city rivals. The gym was packed. The crowd's noise was a constant roar as he bounced the ball twice, finding his rhythm. The bruise on his face had faded completely, though reporters still mentioned it occasionally in stories about the ongoing investigation and the upcoming trial. Officers Voss and Kane had been officially fired the previous week. Their termination letters cited violations of departmental policy and state law in language that left no room for ambiguity. The departmental review was progressing with surprising transparency under Interim Chief Brooks's leadership, with public hearings scheduled to begin the following month. Malik was scheduled to testify alongside several other young men who had come forward with similar experiences. As he prepared to shoot, Malik saw his father in the stands. Elias had left work early to attend the game. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, a moment of connection that carried the weight of everything they had experienced together since that night. Drawing a deep breath, Malik released the ball with perfect form. Watching it arc toward the rim, the net snapped as the ball passed cleanly through, putting his team ahead with seconds remaining on the clock. The crowd erupted. His teammates swarmed him in celebration. And in that moment, Malik was simply a basketball player who had made a crucial shot. But when he looked again toward his father, whose proud smile carried undertones of both joy and lingering sadness, Malik understood that he had also become something more. A young man who had experienced injustice and chosen to transform that experience into action. The road ahead would not be easy. The work of reform would not be accomplished quickly. But he now faced it with a clarity of purpose forged in the crucible of that night's encounter. Justice, he had learned, is not simply served. It is fought for, demanded, and claimed through persistent effort and unwavering determination. And in that ongoing struggle he had found not only his voice but his place in a movement larger than himself, a movement that would continue long after his own story faded from the headlines. When the final buzzer sounded and his teammates lifted him onto their shoulders in victory, Malik allowed himself to fully inhabit the moment, to be both the basketball player celebrating a win and the young man committed to ensuring that what had happened to him led to meaningful change. In that balanced identity, he found a path forward that honored both who he had been before that night and who he had become after it. Justice had been served, but the work continued, and Malik Ellison, his father's son in more ways than one, was ready to do his part. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Meanwhile, I've selected 2 stories for you that I think you'll enjoy. Have a great day.